I still remember the way Brandon laughed. It was that smug, pitying kind of laugh, like he couldn't decide whether to mock me or just feel sorry. "So this is it," he said, waving a hand over my tiny booth at the craft fair. "You're really going to spend your weekends selling these little wood carvings? Cute. Really cute." People walking past looked at me with the same expression, half amusement, half embarrassment on my behalf. I swallowed the burn in my throat and forced a smile. "It's a start," I whispered. Brandon chuckled again, shook his head, and leaned closer, so only I could hear. "Dream smaller, Emma. You're not exactly CEO material." I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to scream. Instead, I picked up one of my carved ornaments, oak leaves polished smooth, and turned it in my hand like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I didn't say another word. I just watched him walk away, leaving my small table and my small dreams behind like they were nothing worth remembering. I didn't grow up in a house where little things were ever enough. My mother, Judith, had this way of looking at me that felt like a measuring tape, assessing my worth against some invisible standard I never quite reached. My older brother, Nathan, was the family's golden boy. He got a full ride to Stanford, went straight into finance, and by 26 he was already driving a Tesla. At family dinners, Dad would always start with Nathan's accomplishments, laying them out like trophies on the table, quarterly bonuses, promotions, the big corner office downtown. When the attention did finally drift to me, it came with that same tired question. "So, Emma," Dad would say, his voice too bright, "any progress on a real job?" I tried to tell them I loved working with my hands, shaping something from nothing. But they'd just exchange glances, like they were silently agreeing to indulge my delusions until I gave up. I can still see Mom's face at my high school graduation party. Nathan had just announced he'd accepted an internship at Morgan Stanley. The whole living room erupted in applause. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. I remember standing there with my own news, acceptance to a local artisan program, but the moment had already passed. My mother turned to me, eyes shining, and said, "Emma, don't let this discourage you. Not everyone's meant for big things." Her words landed like a stone in my chest. The pattern only deepened over time. Every birthday or holiday, Nathan's gifts were extravagant. Custom watches, expensive trips, fancy electronics. I'd save up to make something by hand. Knitted scarves, carved picture frames, pressed flower art. They'd unwrap my gifts politely, murmur a soft thank you, then set them aside. I told myself I didn't mind, that it was enough to do what I loved. But sometimes late at night, lying in my childhood bedroom after another failed attempt to impress them, I'd feel this hollow ache. I tried to hold on to small moments, like when I'd set up a folding table at the local farmer's market, arranging my little carvings in neat rows. I'd watch strangers stop, touch the wood, smile. Those were the moments that convinced me I wasn't wasting my time. But then I'd come home to find Mom on the phone with her sister, voice hushed but unmistakably pitying. "She's so stubborn," she'd say. "I keep telling her, you can't make a life out of hobbies. She needs something real." Those words replayed in my mind for years. I remember one Thanksgiving when Nathan brought home his new girlfriend, Rachel. She was tall, blonde, impeccably dressed, exactly the kind of person my mother dreamed I'd grow up to be. At dinner, Rachel turned to me and asked, "So, what do you do?" I hesitated. "I make things. Woodwork, mostly." Her smile froze for a fraction of a second. Then she said, "Oh, that's sweet." Everyone went back to their conversation. The only person who met my eyes was my cousin Luke, who gave me a look of quiet sympathy. It was in those small, dismissive moments that my resolve began to calcify. I told myself I wouldn't let their approval define me. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, if I said it didn't plant a seed of shame every time they made me feel like I was nothing. The worst was the annual family photo. Nathan in the center, Mom and Dad on either side, and me at the edge, holding whatever handmade thing I'd brought, like a prop that proved I'd tried. Even when I moved out and got my own tiny studio apartment in Portland, the pattern followed me. Mom called once a week to check in, but it always ended the same way. "You know, Emma," she'd say gently, There's still time to change direction. You could go back to school. Maybe business or accounting. Something secure. And every time, I'd force my voice to stay steady as I said, I'm doing what I love. I don't think she ever believed me. I started keeping journals around then, cheap spiral notebooks filled with lists of things I wanted to make, sketches of ideas for wooden sculptures, quotes I copied down to keep myself sane. I'd write the same line over and over like a mantra. One day, this will matter. But there were days I doubted it. Days I'd stare at my empty Etsy shop orders and wonder if they were right all along. Days I'd consider applying for something more respectable, something I could bring up at family gatherings without shame. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon when I was 28. My landlord had just raised the rent again, and I was sitting in my workshop with a half-finished oak jewelry box on my lap, wondering if it was time to let go. That evening, Mom called. "How's everything?" she asked, with that tone that told me she already assumed the answer. "I'm fine," I lied. "Well," she sighed, "I hope you know we're worried about you. You're not where you should be at your age." It wasn't new, but something about hearing it right then, when I was already so close to giving up, made it feel final. Like a verdict I couldn't escape. I hung up, turned the sign on my workshop door to closed, and sat there for hours listening to the rain batter the windows. That night, I made a decision. I would stop trying to prove myself to them. If they couldn't see the value in what I loved, that was their failure, not mine. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I would make things because it mattered to me, even if no one ever clapped. And in that quiet, rain-soaked workshop, I finally understood that my dreams didn't have to look big to anyone else. They only had to feel big to me. About a year after that rainy night in the workshop, I had built something small but solid. My Etsy store had gained a steady trickle of orders. I'd finally found a rhythm. Wake up early, ship out products, spend hours shaping, carving, sanding, and dreaming. I had even managed to land a small feature in a local magazine under their Makers to Watch section. For once, I felt like things were starting to come together. That summer, my cousin Luke invited me to a 4th of July family reunion in Seattle. It had been years since the whole family gathered. Nathan was flying in from New York, and even Aunt Cheryl was coming from Arizona. At first, I was hesitant, but Luke insisted. "Come on, Em. Show them you're doing good. You've built something real." I took a deep breath and agreed. I spent a week preparing, carefully wrapping a custom wooden chessboard I'd made for my father. It was made of black walnut and maple, each square inlaid with delicate care. It was the most intricate piece I'd ever made. I arrived at the reunion carrying that board like a trophy. They were all gathered in the backyard, red cups in hand, burgers sizzling on the grill. Nathan saw me first, gave me a half hug, and immediately turned back to his friends. Mom greeted me with a polite smile. "Oh, Emma, you came? We weren't sure if you'd feel up to it." "I've been doing well, Mom," I said, offering the wrapped gift. "This is for Dad. I made it myself." She took it in her hands like it weighed nothing at all. "That's sweet of you." As the evening went on, I overheard Nathan talking to Uncle Mike. "She's still doing that hobby stuff. It's kind of cute she's still trying." They both chuckled, not realizing I was right behind them. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I didn't say anything. Then came the final blow. The next day, Dad called a family brunch at the hotel. Everyone was there. I thought maybe he was going to say something about the gift or my progress. But instead, he stood at the center of the table, raised his glass, and said, "To Nathan, who's just secured his first 7-figure deal." Applause erupted. My mom dabbed her eyes. I looked down at my plate and forced a smile. When it was over, I walked out onto the patio. Luke followed me. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine." I lied. "They didn't even open your gift." I noticed. Then Mom stepped outside, her voice sharp and casual, like she was brushing off lint. "Emma, we've been talking. Maybe it's better if you skip the Christmas gathering this year. It'll be crowded, and there's just a lot of pressure. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable." I stared at her. "You don't want me to feel uncomfortable?" I repeated, voice tight. She looked genuinely confused. "It's not personal. It's just easier if things are simpler." That word, simpler, landed like a slap. I nodded once. Of course. I wouldn't want to complicate things. I left without saying goodbye to anyone else. 2 days later, Luke called. I know it's not my place, but I thought you should know. Your mom told the family you're going through a bit of a phase. That you're not stable right now. I sat in silence. And Nathan, Luke continued, he made a joke during dinner. Said if you show up at Christmas, they might not answer the door. I felt something collapse inside of me. Not a breakdown. Not tears. Just a hollow kind of finality, like something inside me had quietly died. I didn't reply. Just thanked him and hung up. That evening, I went into my workshop and looked around at all the pieces I'd built. Not just the wood and the tools, but the hours, the sweat, the hunger, the silent belief that maybe, just maybe, I was worth something. I didn't smash anything. I didn't scream or cry. I just stood in the quiet and let the rejection settle in like dust. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not in rage, but in resolve. If they couldn't see me now, they never would. And that was the last time I asked anyone in my family to believe in me. The days after that phone call with Luke were quiet. Not the soft kind of quiet you wrap around yourself for comfort. This was a silence that scraped against my skin. I went about my work as usual, but something fundamental had shifted. For years, I'd been trying to build a bridge back to them, to prove that even if I started small, I was still worth their time. That if I just worked harder, one day they'd finally look at me and say, "We're proud." But the bridge was gone now. Burned without ceremony. I didn't announce my decision to step away. I didn't call anyone to explain. I didn't write a post or send a message or try to salvage what little dignity I had left in their eyes. I simply stopped. I stopped answering my mother's weekly calls. I stopped liking Nathan's endless posts about his latest bonuses and business trips. I stopped checking the family group chat where they shared photos of celebrations I was never invited to. I canceled the automatic transfer I'd been sending every month to help Mom cover the property taxes on the old house. I had never made a big deal of it, just $250 a month, quietly withdrawn from my checking account. But the moment I hit cancel recurring payment, I felt a strange, shivery relief. A week later, she called. When I didn't pick up, she left a voicemail. "Emma," she began, her voice wrapped in that thin veneer of politeness she used when she was angry but didn't want to admit it. "I noticed the transfer didn't come through. I'm sure it's just a mistake. But, well, let me know." I didn't call back. I turned off my phone for 3 days and threw myself into work. I carved 12 new jewelry boxes from a single slab of cherry wood, losing track of time as I sanded and shaped each one until they gleamed. I packaged them in brown paper and wrote simple thank you notes by hand. By the time I switched my phone back on, there were 4 new voicemails. The last one was shorter than the rest. Just my mother's voice, flat and clipped. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, Emma, but you're being childish." I set the phone face down and kept working. It's funny how peace can look exactly like loneliness when you first taste it. Those first few weeks were disorienting. No one checking in, no one criticizing me either. Just a wide, echoing quiet I'd never had the courage to let in before. At night, I'd sit in the middle of my workshop with a mug of tea, looking around at the neat rows of finished pieces. For the first time, I realized no one was going to come along and crown me successful. No one was going to declare that what I did was finally big enough to matter. And for the first time, I understood that maybe that was okay. I stopped worrying about whether my work would impress them. I started thinking instead about the people who actually bought it, the ones who didn't know me, didn't carry decades of expectation and disappointment. They just saw something I'd made and thought, "I want this in my home." I remember packing a large order for a boutique in Denver. As I was sealing the final box, I caught sight of my reflection in the shop window, my hair in a messy knot, sawdust clinging to my shirt, my eyes tired but clear. I didn't look like success as my family defined it, but I looked like someone who had chosen her own life. That night, I wrote in my journal, "For the first time, my silence isn't fear. It's freedom." I stopped showing up where I wasn't wanted. I let invitations sit unanswered. I didn't feel the urge to check whether they were talking about me behind my back. I had stepped out of the spotlight of their judgment, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized the darkness wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. And in that silent withdrawal, a different kind of power took root. Not the loud, showy kind that needed to be seen to feel real, but something quieter and stronger. Something I knew, even then, would outlast every dismissive word they'd ever spoken. The autumn after I stepped back from my family, I was in my workshop one evening, cleaning up after a long day of carving. A soft drizzle tapped at the windows, and the space smelled of cedar shavings and varnish. I'd just finished polishing a new set of jewelry stands when I noticed a message request blinking on my phone. It was from someone named Megan Price. The name didn't ring a bell. I almost ignored it. These days, most of my messages were either spam or curt order questions. But something made me open it. Subject: Your work saved my grandmother's memories. I frowned, curiosity pricking me. I tapped the message open. Hi, Emma. You don't know me, but I wanted to share something with you. Last winter, my grandmother passed away. She had this old cedar chest that belonged to her mother, one of the only things she managed to bring when she immigrated here from Poland. It was in terrible shape, falling apart at the seams. When I found her shop online, I didn't think anyone would bother to help me restore something so modest. But you did. You didn't just fix it, you treated it like it mattered. Like she mattered. When my grandmother was still alive, she kept the chest at the foot of her bed. After you repaired it, she ran her hands over the lid and started telling me stories I'd never heard, about the village she came from, the sister she lost, the promise she made to herself that she'd build a life here no matter how small it seemed. She died 3 weeks later, and I believe she left this world feeling seen. I thought you should know that. Megan. I reread the message 3 times, my chest tightening. I remembered that project, a battered cedar chest with splintered panels and rusted hinges. Megan had mailed it to me in pieces, along with a note that said, "It's probably hopeless, but I can't bear to throw it away." It had taken me 2 weeks to bring it back to life. I hadn't thought of it again after shipping it home. I never imagined it meant more than a restored box. I scrolled to the bottom of the email and found a photograph attached. It was an elderly woman, white hair pinned neatly back, sitting on a quilted bedspread. Her gnarled hands rested on the cedar chest, her eyes bright with some tender memory. I pressed a hand to my mouth. In all the years I'd spent trying to prove my worth to people who refused to see me, I hadn't realized how much it meant to be seen by a stranger. I wrote Megan back that same night, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. Thank you for telling me. I needed to hear this more than you know. Emma. I thought that would be the end of it. But a few days later, Megan tagged me in a post on Instagram. @Megan. Some makers don't just create things, they restore stories. Thank you, @Emma's Woodworks, for giving my grandmother's memories a home. Within hours, her post was shared dozens of times. A local historian picked it up, then a regional magazine reposted the photo. My Etsy notifications exploded. Orders came in faster than I could process. Late that evening, I called Luke for the first time in months. "Hey," he said cautiously. "Everything okay?" I laughed, a raw, startled sound. "Actually, yeah. I think everything's better than okay." I told him about Megan, about the post, about the way it felt to finally have my work recognized without caveats or pity. "That's incredible, Luke said, genuine warmth in his voice. "I'm so glad." He paused. "You know, Rachel shared that post too." She wrote, "I didn't understand Emma before. I do now." I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment. For years, I'd been invisible to them, just the girl with her little carvings. And now, without trying to prove anything, my work was speaking for itself. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Thick cream paper, neat handwriting. It was from Aunt Cheryl. "Dear Emma, I saw the article about your workshop. I'm ashamed to admit I never really understood what you were doing before. But I want you to know, I think it's extraordinary. Your grandmother was a woodworker. Did you know that? She used to carve small toys for us when we were kids. Maybe you got it from her. If you ever come to Arizona, I'd love to show you the little horse she made me. I think you'd appreciate it more than anyone. With love, Cheryl. I held the letter for a long time, feeling something in my chest unwind. They hadn't all been blind. Some had simply never been given the chance to see. That night, I walked through my workshop, touching each finished piece. For the first time, I realized these weren't just objects, they were tiny monuments to survival, to starting small and daring to keep going. I thought of my grandmother, of Megan's grandmother, of every woman who ever poured herself into something that seemed insignificant to everyone else. Maybe we were all part of the same quiet legacy. Maybe it was enough. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to reach my family. The article about my workshop had been picked up by a regional news outlet, then reposted on a bigger platform under the headline, "The Woman Who Builds More Than Furniture, How Emma Harris is Restoring Lost Histories One Piece at a Time." I didn't realize how far it had spread until I logged into Facebook one morning and saw over 100 notifications. The article was being shared by strangers, acquaintances, and most shocking of all, by people from my own family. Nathan had posted it with a caption that made my stomach twist. "So proud of my little sister for finally hitting her stride. Amazing work, Emma." My first reaction was an incredulous laugh. Finally hitting my stride? As though the last decade hadn't happened. As if he'd always been supportive. Within an hour, my phone began to buzz with calls. I ignored them all. But eventually, a text popped up from Mom. "Hi, honey. We saw your article. So impressive. Let's talk soon. Love you." I set the phone down and went back to work. 2 days later, as I was packing an order, there was a knock at my studio door. I wiped my hands on my apron, heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. When I pulled open the door, I found my mother standing on the steps, her purse clutched like a lifeline. "Emma," she said, voice soft. "Can we come in?" "We?" Dad stepped out from behind her, wearing the same tentative smile he'd used at every family gathering. I hesitated, then stepped aside. They entered cautiously, as if the space itself might reject them. Mom's eyes moved over the walls lined with finished pieces, the organized shelves of tools, the neat rows of shipping boxes. "It's beautiful," she murmured. I didn't reply. She cleared her throat. "We wanted to talk. About everything." I gestured to the chairs by my workbench. They sat, exchanging a quick glance I recognized too well. One that meant they'd rehearsed this. "Emma," Dad began, "we're sorry if you ever felt unsupported. We didn't mean to make you feel small." I raised my eyebrows. If I felt unsupported? Mom winced. "You have to understand, we only wanted what was best for you." "No," I said calmly. "You wanted what looked best to you." Silence settled between us. After a moment, Mom straightened her shoulders. "Well, regardless, we're here now, and we'd like to reset." "Reset," I repeated. She nodded. "All families have misunderstandings. We're proud of you, Emma. Truly. We were thinking maybe you could come for Thanksgiving. We can put everything behind us." I folded my arms over my chest. "Everything?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We also wanted to ask if you'd mind taking down that post your friend shared on Facebook. Some of the comments were unkind, and people in the community might get the wrong idea about how we treated you." There it was. The real reason they were here. I exhaled slowly, the last of any lingering hope dissolving. "So this isn't about apologizing," I said. "It's about managing how it looks." "No," Mom said quickly. "It's about healing. About moving forward." "Moving forward," I echoed, tasting the words. They stared at me expectantly. For a moment, I was tempted to let them off the hook, to pretend their sudden support was genuine, to pretend the past could be swept away with a single visit. But then I remembered every time they'd laughed, every time they'd minimized my work, every time I'd walked out of a room feeling smaller than when I entered. I thought of Megan's letter, of Aunt Cheryl's note, of the strangers who believed in me without needing any explanation. I didn't owe them this performance anymore. I stood and gestured toward the door. "I appreciate that you came. but I'm not interested in rewriting the past to make it more comfortable for you. Mom's mouth fell open. Emma? No, I said. I don't think you're proud of me. I think you're proud of what other people are saying about me. That's not the same thing. Dad looked away. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the familiar guilt. Only clarity. I'm not angry, I added. I'm just done pretending. They didn't try to argue. When they finally left, I closed the door behind them and rested my forehead against the cool wood. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. For so many years, I'd thought the hardest thing would be being alone. But it turned out the hardest thing was realizing I'd never really been alone at all. I'd simply been waiting for the wrong people to see me. And now I didn't need them to. The weeks after that final conversation with my parents were quieter than I expected. No more calls. No more attempts to draw me back into the old choreography, where I played the grateful daughter, and they pretended to approve. I thought maybe the silence would feel heavy, but it didn't. It felt like a clean room after a storm, empty but bright. I poured myself into my work. The orders from the viral article kept coming, and for the first time, my days were filled not with trying to prove myself, but with the simple satisfaction of creating. One crisp October morning, as I was tying twine around a stack of finished orders, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. I hesitated, then picked up. Hello. A woman's warm voice came through the line. Hi, is this Emma Harris? Yes. This is Janine Richards. I'm the director of the Pacific Northwest Artisan Collective. We've been following your work for a while, but your recent story really caught our eye. Would you have time to talk? My throat went dry. Sure, I said carefully. I have time. We host an annual event, she continued, to showcase craftspeople who are preserving traditional techniques. We'd love to invite you to be one of our keynote exhibitors. I sank onto my work stool. Wow. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she laughed gently. You deserve it. When we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at the rows of finished pieces lining the shelves. 10 years ago, I'd been the girl at the craft fair, clutching her little carvings while people like Brandon smirked. Now, someone wanted me to stand up in front of hundreds of guests and tell them why this mattered. I didn't cry, not right away. But later that night, when the house was dark and still, I let the tears come. Not grief, not shame. Just the release of finally feeling seen, not for how big my dreams looked to others, but for how real they had always been to me. The night before the exhibition, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing my workshop, touching each piece as if to reassure myself they were really mine. That this life I'd built hadn't been a fever dream. At dawn, I loaded my truck with my best work, restored heirlooms, intricate jewelry boxes, carved panels that had taken me months to complete. The exhibition hall was a vaulted space lined with tall windows. Volunteers helped me set up a display, polished wood gleaming under the morning light. A placard with my name, Emma Harris, artisan woodworker, stood in front of the table. I stared at it for a long time. By noon, the hall was filled with guests. People wandered past, admiring the craftsmanship. Some asked questions about my process. Others told me stories about their own family heirlooms. But the moment that stayed with me came late in the afternoon. A middle-aged woman with kind blue eyes lingered at the edge of my table. When I smiled at her, she stepped forward. You don't remember me, do you? I searched her face, but nothing clicked. I'm Megan's aunt, she said softly. Megan Price. The woman whose grandmother's cedar chest you restored. Oh, I breathed. Of course. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped package. I wanted to bring you this. I took it carefully, unwrapping the brown paper. Inside was a framed photograph of Megan's grandmother sitting with the chest, her hands resting on the polished lid. She always said, the woman continued, her voice unsteady, that people think success is about money or prestige. But it's really about leaving something behind that proves you cared. You did that for her. You gave her back a piece of her life. I swallowed hard. Thank you. That means more than I can say. She smiled. No, Thank you. After she left, I held the photo against my chest. In that moment, every scrap of doubt I'd carried all those years felt small, like brittle leaves dissolving under the weight of something stronger. Late in the day, a young couple approached my table. The man looked shy, but the woman stepped forward. I hope this isn't weird, but your story inspired us. We've been scared to start our own business, but hearing about how you built yours made us think maybe it doesn't have to be all at once. Maybe it's okay to start small. It is, I said quietly. It's more than okay. She nodded, her eyes shining. Thank you. After they left, I finally understood that I hadn't just been making things to fill the space where my family's approval should have been. I'd been making them to find my own place in the world, to build something no one could take away. When the event ended, Janine hugged me. This is only the beginning, she whispered. Driving home that night, I felt the difference. Before, every success had felt fragile, like it would shatter if my family didn't validate it. Now I knew better. Kindness was its own foundation, and mine was finally strong enough to stand on. It had been almost a year since I'd last seen my parents when their email arrived. The subject line was simple: let's talk. I stared at it for a while, letting the cursor hover over the screen. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. But I also wasn't curious. That was new. The message itself was exactly what I expected, just polished enough to look sincere, but still filtered through the same carefully curated lens they'd always used when things got messy. We've been reflecting on everything. We know mistakes were made. We don't want to live with distance between us anymore. If you're willing, we'd love to invite you to Christmas this year. Everyone will be there. We want to start fresh. The word fresh sat in my gut like a stone. There was no mention of specific regrets. No acknowledgement of the years they'd diminished my dreams. Just a generic olive branch built on nostalgia and the unspoken assumption that enough time had passed to call things even. I closed the laptop and went to the window. Outside, the trees had turned completely, fiery reds and burnt oranges scattered like confetti across the street. A wind moved through the leaves in slow, steady waves. For a long time, I just stood there and breathed. That evening, I made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in the thick wool shawl I'd woven last winter, and pulled out a blank card from the drawer beside my work table. My handwriting was slow, but certain.
Mom, Dad.
Thank you for the invitation. I won't be attending. I wish you well.
Emma.
I didn't over-explain. I didn't dramatize. I didn't ask to be understood. I simply said no. A day later, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was controlled, but brittle. Emma, I got your card. I just don't understand why you're holding on to things. We're trying to make peace. Is that not what you want? I didn't call back. A week passed. Then another voicemail, from Dad this time. Pumpkin, your mother's upset. I'm not saying we were perfect, but no family is. Can't we just move on? I deleted it. I wasn't punishing them. I just didn't need their version of healing anymore. I had done the work, the real work, without them. And now, the peace I felt wasn't fragile or conditional. It was mine. About a month later, I was out walking through the local craft fair, one I used to visit when I was just starting out. I passed a booth where a young girl was selling hand-painted bookmarks. Her prices were low, too low, but her eyes lit up when I asked her about her technique. They're not fancy, she said quickly. I know they look kind of homemade. I smiled. That's the best kind. I bought 3 and handed her a few extra dollars. As I walked away, I heard her whisper to her friend, "She's the one from the article. That's her." It didn't feel like victory. It felt like completion. That evening, I returned home and found an envelope tucked in the mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Rachel. Yes, Nathan's Rachel. The letter was short.
Emma.
I want you to know I see it now. The way they treated you wasn't love. It was control dressed up as concern. I hope you keep building the life they never understood. You were always more than they could comprehend.
R.
I smiled softly and tucked it into my journal. There was a time when I would have clung to that letter, shown it to someone, let it validate everything I felt.
But now?
Now it was just a gentle reminder of how far I'd come. In December, on Christmas morning, I sat on my porch with a mug of cider, wrapped in the stillness of a snowy Oregon day. I knew my family was probably all together, laughing, sharing stories, playing the same roles they'd always played. And for the first time, I didn't wish I was there. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt whole. The past didn't need to be rewritten. It didn't need to be forgiven either. It just needed to be left where it belonged, behind me. And that, I realized, was the final no I had never known how to give. Not out of rebellion, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. And once I said it, I never had to say it again. Some nights, I still wake up thinking about the first time I tried to explain my dream to my family. I was 22, sitting at that long oak dining table with a stack of sketches in my lap. My palms were sweating. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my ears. I remember Nathan glancing at my papers, then looking away. Dad fiddled with his phone. Mom smiled with that polite, pained expression she reserved for when I said something she didn't understand. "You could always do this as a hobby," she'd suggested gently. "You know, on the weekends. But you'll need something real to fall back on." I was too young, too desperate for approval, to say what I felt. This is real. It would take me more than a decade to learn that truth for myself. I think about that version of me often, the girl who kept trying to be palatable, who kept shrinking herself to fit their comfort, who believed that love and acceptance were rewards you earned by contorting into the shape other people needed. If you're watching this and you feel like you're still that version of yourself, still explaining, still hoping, still starving for crumbs, please hear me when I say this. You don't have to become smaller for anyone. You don't have to abandon what calls to you just because it makes other people uneasy. You don't have to keep showing up where you are not respected. It doesn't matter if your dream looks insignificant to everyone else. It doesn't matter if it starts small. All that matters is that it's yours. The funny thing about starting small is that it teaches you everything about who you are. It teaches you how to be patient when the world ignores you, how to be resourceful when you don't have enough, how to keep going when no one cheers you on. Starting small doesn't mean you're lesser. It means you're brave. And sometimes, that bravery becomes the very thing that makes you unstoppable. I used to believe that if my family never accepted my work, I'd always feel like I was failing. That no success would count unless they called it success, too. But standing here now in the life I built with my own hands, I finally understand. They don't have to get it. They don't have to approve. They don't have to love this part of me at all. Because I do. And that's enough. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are not too much. You are not delusional. You are not wasting your time. You are just too real for people who pretend. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking to be invited in. Sometimes, the most profound act of love is to stand in your truth, even when it means standing alone. And sometimes, not showing up is how you finally come home to yourself. So, if you're wondering whether you're allowed to say no, you are. If you're wondering whether your work, your voice, your art is enough, it is. If you're wondering whether you deserve peace, you do. I used to think my story was about proving everyone wrong. But it's not. It's about finally believing I was right about myself all along. And I hope, one day, you'll believe the same about you.